Aaron sat in the driver's seat of his old, beat-up sedan, staring out at the near-empty gas station parking lot. His fingers tapped lightly against the steering wheel as he exhaled a slow breath, watching how the streetlights buzzed in the distance. The night air was cool, and the quiet hum of passing cars filled the space around him. This wasn't how he had pictured his life turning out. A few years ago, he had a steady job, a small apartment, and plans for the future. But life had a way of slipping through his fingers. A series of bad breaks, job loss, an eviction, and a few burned bridges had left him with little more than the clothes on his back and the car he now called home. The backseat was cluttered with a few extra shirts, a blanket, and a duffel bag filled with whatever he needed to get by. He kept himself clean using public restrooms and stretched every dollar he had. It wasn't much, but at least he had shelter. Aaron rubbed his eyes, exhaustion creeping in when a loud bang startled him. His head snapped up, scanning the parking lot. A woman stood near the edge of the gas station, next to a sleek black car with its hood slightly ajar. She was pacing, her phone pressed against her ear, frustration clear on her face. Curiosity tugged at him, but he hesitated. He wasn't exactly in a position to help anyone. He barely had enough gas to get himself through the next day, let alone assist a woman with car trouble. Still, something about the way she glanced around, her movements tense and uncertain, made him push open his car door. As he approached, the woman let out a frustrated sigh and shoved her phone into her pocket. "Everything all right?" Aaron asked, his voice even but cautious. She turned, her eyes flicking over him for a moment. There was a slight hesitation before she answered, "My car just died, and my phone's barely holding on. I was trying to get a tow, but the service is backed up, and I don't know how long it's going to take." Aaron glanced at the vehicle. It was a luxury sedan, something expensive, not the kind of car that usually broke down in the middle of the night. "You sure it's not just the battery?" he asked. She exhaled, running a hand through her blonde hair. "I have no idea. I don't know much about cars." Aaron nodded, stepping closer. "Mind if I take a look?" She hesitated again before nodding. "Yeah, sure. At this point, I'll take any help I can get." Aaron lifted the hood, inspecting the engine. He wasn't a mechanic, but he knew enough to recognize a dead battery when he saw one. "Your battery's completely drained," he said. "I have jumper cables in my car. I can give you a jump, see if that gets it going." Relief washed over her face. "That would be amazing, thank you." Aaron jogged back to his car, rummaged through his trunk, and pulled out the cables. Within minutes, he had them hooked up, his engine running as he tried to transfer some life into her battery. As they waited, she folded her arms and glanced at him. "I'm Wren, by the way." "Aaron," he replied, tightening the connection on the clamps. "You live around here?" she asked. Aaron hesitated for a fraction of a second before shrugging. "Something like that." Wren didn't press for details, and for that he was grateful. A few minutes later, he signaled for her to try the ignition. The car sputtered before coming to life, the engine purring back to normal. Wren let out a small laugh of relief. "You are a lifesaver." Aaron unhooked the cables and shut her hood. "Should be good for now, but you might want to get the battery checked first thing in the morning." She nodded. "Yeah, definitely." She hesitated then, shifting on her feet. "I feel like I should do something to thank you." Aaron shook his head. "It's fine, just glad you're not stuck here all night." She studied him for a moment, as if there was something she wanted to say but wasn't sure how to phrase it. Whatever it was, she let it go. "Well, thank you again, Aaron," she said, offering a small, genuine smile. He nodded. "Take care, Wren." She climbed into her car, and he watched as she drove off, disappearing into the night. Aaron exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face as he made his way back to his own car. He had barely enough gas left for the week, and he wasn't sure when his next meal was coming. But somehow, helping Wren had made the night feel a little lighter. He settled back into his seat, closed his eyes, and let sleep slowly take over. The next day, as he sat outside a nearby grocery store, sipping the last of his cheap coffee, a sleek luxury car rolled to a stop in front of him. Aaron blinked in surprise as the tinted window rolled down, revealing Wren behind the wheel. "Hey, Aaron," she said, her voice carrying something more than just a simple greeting. He frowned slightly, standing up. "Wren, what are you doing here?" She smiled, but there was something purposeful in the way she looked at him. "I wanted to talk to you," she said. "Do you have a minute?" Aaron had no idea what this was about, but something told him this conversation was going to change everything. Aaron hesitated before stepping closer to Wren's car. The sleek vehicle looked out of place in the grocery store parking lot, surrounded by older, worn-down sedans and pickup trucks. He glanced around, as if expecting someone else to be the reason for her visit, but Wren's eyes remained fixed on him. "I wasn't expecting to see you again," he admitted. She nodded. "I know, but I wanted to find you." Aaron shifted his weight. "Why?" "I owe you one," she said simply. "You helped me out last night, and I'm not the kind of person to just walk away from something like that." Aaron studied her for a moment. There was something different about her now. Last night, she had been frustrated and caught off guard, but today, she seemed composed, purposeful. "You don't owe me anything," he said. Wren tilted her head slightly. "I get that, but can we at least talk for a bit?" Aaron considered it. He had time, he always had time. There wasn't much else to do when every day was just about getting by. He nodded. "Yeah, all right." She reached toward the passenger door. "Get in." Aaron hesitated again, but eventually opened the door and slid into the seat. The interior smelled of leather and something faintly floral. It was clean, polished, and comfortable in a way that his own car never could be. Wren pulled out of the parking lot and onto the road. "Where are we going?" Aaron asked. "Somewhere with decent food," she answered. "Have you eaten yet?" Aaron wasn't about to admit that his last meal had been a handful of crackers and an old granola bar. "I could eat," he said instead. She nodded, as if that was the answer she expected. They drove in silence for a few minutes before she pulled into a small diner on the edge of town. The kind of place with faded red booths and a coffee pot never far from being refilled. They took a booth near the window. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired but kind eyes, set down 2 menus before walking off. Wren didn't bother looking at hers before turning her attention back to him. "So, Aaron," she said, fingers tapping lightly against the table, "what's your story?" He exhaled slowly, leaning back in his seat. "That's a broad question." She gave a short nod. "I know, but I want to understand you." Aaron wasn't used to people wanting to understand him. Most either ignored him or pitied him, and neither option ever led anywhere worth remembering. He tapped his fingers against the table, considering how much he wanted to say. "I had a job," he began. "Nothing flashy, but it paid the bills. Then I lost it. Got another one, but it didn't last either. Things just unraveled from there." Wren listened without interrupting. "Eventually, I ran out of options," he continued. "I didn't have family to fall back on, and my friends had their own problems. So I did what I could, ended up living out of my car." She absorbed his words without the usual pity that people tended to offer. Instead, she asked, "How long have you been like this?" Aaron shrugged. "Long enough." The waitress returned, and Aaron ordered a simple breakfast plate, while Wren ordered coffee and toast. Once they were alone again, she leaned forward slightly. "You don't strike me as someone who just gives up," she said. Aaron let out a dry chuckle. Giving up and running out of options aren't the same thing. She considered that. Fair enough. But you helped me last night when you didn't have to. That tells me you're not the kind of person who just watches from the sidelines. Aaron didn't know what to say to that. Their food arrived, and for a few minutes, they ate in silence. Aaron hadn't realized how hungry he was until he started eating, and Wren seemed content to let him focus on that. When he finally slowed down, she spoke again. "I run a business," she said. That caught his attention. "A pretty big one, actually," she continued. "My family's company. We deal in real estate, property development, things like that." Aaron raised an eyebrow. "That explains the car." She laughed lightly. "Yeah, but that's not why I'm telling you this." He set his fork down. "Then why are you?" She studied him carefully. "Because I see someone who's capable but stuck, and I don't believe in just walking away when can do something about it." Aaron leaned back slightly. "You don't even know me." "Maybe not," she admitted. "But I know you didn't have to help me last night, and you did anyway. That says enough." Aaron wasn't sure what to make of that. "So what are you saying?" he asked cautiously. "I'm saying that I want to help you," she said. Aaron inhaled slowly, letting her words settle. Help. It wasn't something he was used to accepting, and he wasn't sure if he even knew how. "Help how?" he asked. She smiled slightly. "That's something we can figure out." Aaron wanted to believe her, but life had taught him that things were rarely that simple. Aaron leaned back in the booth, his fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the table. Wren's words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. He wasn't sure how to respond. Offers like this didn't come out of nowhere, at least not in his experience. He had spent so much time figuring things out on his own, scraping by with what little he had. The idea of someone stepping in to help him, genuinely help him, felt almost foreign. "You don't have to say anything right now," Wren added, sensing his hesitation. "I just wanted to put it out there." Aaron exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting to the window. Cars rolled past on the street outside, people moving through their day without a second thought. He wondered how many of them had ever known what it was like to be in his position, to wake up every morning with no clear path forward. "You don't even know what I can do," he said after a moment. "You don't know if I'd be any good at whatever you have in mind." Wren didn't seem fazed by the doubt in his voice. "I know you're resourceful. You figured out what was wrong with my car in minutes, and you didn't hesitate to do something about it. That tells me you're capable." Aaron rubbed his jaw, considering her words. It was true that he had always been good with his hands. Before everything fell apart, he had worked in maintenance, fixing things, solving problems. But that had been a long time ago. "You don't trust me," Wren observed. Aaron shook his head. "It's not that. I just don't trust. Situations like this, things don't usually work out for me." She nodded as if she understood. "I get that, but this isn't charity, if that's what you're worried about. I'm not handing you something for free. I want to put you in a position where you can help yourself." Aaron thought about that. He had no problem working for what he had. He had never been the kind of person to take advantage of kindness. But something about this still felt too good to be true. "What exactly are you offering?" he asked, not ready to commit but willing to hear her out. Wren took a sip of her coffee before answering. "I have a few properties that need work. Some of them need small repairs, others need more attention. I could use someone who knows their way around a toolbox." Aaron frowned slightly. "I haven't done that kind of work in a while." "Then this could be a chance to get back into it," she offered. "Start fresh." The word "start fresh" lingered in his mind. He had tried more times than he could count to rebuild, but each time something had knocked him back down. Maybe this time would be different. Still, he had questions. "What do you get out of this?" Wren smiled slightly. "Besides getting my properties fixed up, I get to help someone who actually deserves it. That's enough for me." Aaron studied her carefully. She didn't seem like the kind of person who did things on a whim. There was purpose in everything she said, and for some reason, she had decided he was worth the effort. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to believe that this could be his way out. But doubt clung to him, whispering that it was too risky, that it could all fall apart just as quickly as it had appeared. "I need to think about it," he said finally. Wren nodded, not looking surprised. "Take your time, but don't take too long." Aaron glanced at her. "Why?" "Because opportunities like this don't wait forever," she said simply. They finished their meal, and Wren paid the bill without making a big deal about it. As they stepped outside, she turned to him. "If you decide you're interested, meet me here tomorrow morning," she said, gesturing toward the diner. "We'll go from there." Aaron nodded, though he still wasn't sure what he would do. Wren climbed into her car, and as she pulled away, Aaron stood there for a long moment, his mind racing. That night, as he sat in his car, the weight of the decision pressed down on him. He thought about everything that had led him to this point, all the setbacks, the disappointments, the nights spent wondering if he would ever get back on his feet. Could he trust this? Could he trust her? He had nothing to lose. And maybe, just maybe, he had everything to gain. The next morning, Aaron woke up stiff in the driver's seat of his car. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft glow across the parking lot where he had spent the night. He rubbed his eyes, stretching as best as he could in the cramped space before reaching for the half-empty bottle of water beside him. His mind was still tangled with thoughts from the night before. Wren's offer lingered, tempting yet uncertain. Trusting opportunities like this had never worked out for him in the past, but something about her felt different, genuine in a way that he wasn't used to. With a deep breath, he made his decision. By the time he arrived at the diner, Wren was already there, leaning against her car with a coffee cup in hand. She looked up as he approached, a knowing expression on her face. "I wasn't sure if you'd show," she said. Aaron shrugged. "Neither was I." Wren motioned for him to get in, and they drove off without another word. The city streets gave way to quieter roads, leading them toward the outskirts of town. Eventually, they pulled up to a property, a two-story house with peeling paint, an overgrown yard, and a driveway littered with leaves. "This is one of the places I was talking about," Wren explained as she stepped out of the car. "It needs work, a lot of work." Aaron scanned the house, noting the sagging porch and the rusted railing. The structure itself seemed solid, but years of neglect had taken their toll. "You sure you want me working on this?" he asked, glancing at her. Wren gave a small nod. "I am." Something about her certainty settled his doubts, if only a little. They spent the next hour walking through the property. Aaron took note of what needed fixing: the loose floorboards, the chipped walls, the broken fixtures. Wren listened as he pointed out potential repairs, nodding thoughtfully at his observations. Eventually, they returned to the front porch. "I wasn't kidding when I said I wanted to help," Wren said, leaning against the railing. "And I know things have probably been tough for you, but also know you didn't hesitate to help me when I needed it." Aaron shifted, crossing his arms. He wasn't sure where she was going with this, but he stayed quiet. "I want to do something in return," she continued, "to acknowledge what you did for me." Aaron frowned slightly. "Told you, you don't owe me anything." She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, holding it out to him. "I know," she said, "but I want to do it anyway." Aaron hesitated before taking the envelope. He opened it, and his breath caught in his throat. Inside was a check, one written out in his name for $10,000. His fingers tightened around the paper. This is too much." Wren shook her head. "No, it's not. You helped me when you didn't have to, and I know this won't fix everything, but maybe it can help you get back on your feet." Aaron stared at the check, his mind racing. $10,000. It was more money than he had seen in a long time. Enough to get a place to stay, enough to start over. He swallowed hard. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Wren replied. Just use it, however you need to. Aaron's chest felt tight, emotions he wasn't used to surfacing all at once. He had spent so long barely scraping by, never expecting anything from anyone. And now, here was Wren handing him a chance he never saw coming. He met her gaze, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe just maybe things could change. Aaron stood outside the worn-down house, the check still in his hand. It felt surreal, like something that didn't quite belong to his reality. For so long, his world had been about survival, about making do with whatever scraps he could hold onto. Now, for the first time in years, he had something solid. A chance. He turned to Wren, who was watching him with a patience that made him uneasy. She had given him this money without expectation, without strings attached. That alone was hard to process. Still, there was work to be done. He wasn't about to take this money and run, not when he had already agreed to help. He had skills, and now he had a real opportunity to use them. Instead of pocketing the check and walking away, he folded it carefully and placed it inside his jacket. Then, he looked back at the house. Where do you want me to start? Wren's expression shifted, something like approval crossing her face. She gestured toward the front steps, where the wood had rotted through in places. That would be a good place. Aaron nodded and got to work. The first few days were exhausting, but they were the best kind of exhausting. Aaron spent his time tearing out broken boards, replacing weak supports, and slowly bringing the house back to life. His hands ached at the end of the day, but it was a good ache, a reminder that he was doing something real, something that mattered. Wren stopped by occasionally, bringing coffee or food, but for the most part, she let him do his job. She trusted him, and that trust made him push himself harder. With the check safely stored away, he made a decision. Instead of spending it all at once, he would be careful. He found a cheap motel nearby, just enough to get proper sleep and a shower, but not so much that it would drain his funds too quickly. He rationed his spending, making sure every dollar counted. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Wren arrived just as he was packing up his tools. She leaned against the car, watching the house with a thoughtful expression. "You've done a lot in just a few days," she remarked. Aaron wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. Still a long way to go. She nodded, then turned to face him. "You thinking about what comes next?" Aaron exhaled, considering her words. For the first time in years, he could actually think about the future instead of just the next day. "I don't want to go back to just scraping by," he admitted. "I want to make something out of this." Wren tilted her head slightly. "What would that look like for you?" Aaron looked at the house, at the work he had done. "Forgot how much I liked fixing things. Maybe I could do something with that. Start small, take on jobs here and there." Wren crossed her arms, considering his words. "I might be able to help with that." Aaron raised an eyebrow. "You already helped plenty." She shook her head. "I'm not talking about money. I know people, contractors, property managers. If you want steady work, I can introduce you to the right people." Aaron hesitated. It was one thing to accept a check, but connections, that was another level of trust. Still, he had come this far. "If you're serious, I'd be willing to meet them," he said finally. Wren smiled. "Good, I'll set something up." True to her word, Wren introduced him to a few people in the industry. They weren't big-time developers, but they were the kind of people who always needed reliable workers. Aaron took on a few small jobs, proving himself piece by piece. The money wasn't rolling in yet, but it was steady. He moved out of the motel and into a small apartment, nothing fancy, just a place where he could sleep without worrying about being asked to leave. Weeks turned into months, and slowly but surely, his life began to take shape again. He saved every bit he could, always keeping the lessons of the past in mind. He had been at rock bottom before, and he wasn't about to take this second chance for granted. Wren kept in touch, though her own work kept her busy. Still, every now and then, she would drop by a job site just to check in. One afternoon, as Erin was finishing up repairs on a rental property, she showed up unannounced. "You're hard to track down these days," she said, watching as he packed up his tools. Erin smirked. Busy is better than the alternative. She nodded. "Heard from one of the contractors you're making a name for yourself." Erin leaned against the truck he had finally saved up enough to buy. "It's a start." Wren studied him for a moment before speaking. "I'm glad I ran into you that night." Erin thought back to that moment, the broken-down car, the empty parking lot. It felt like a lifetime ago. "Me too," he admitted. She smiled, then glanced at her phone. "I should go, but let's grab coffee soon." Erin nodded. "Yeah, it's like that." As she walked away, Erin took a deep breath, letting it all sink in. He had come a long way from sleeping in his car, from wondering when his next meal would be. And for the first time in a long time, the future looked like something worth looking forward to.